How disappointed were you guys that they didn't have any of the nipple plugs that you'd pull out and then watch the guy bleed to death, like
The heart plug, yeah.
the heart plug?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all those sort of like nits I had to pick. I miss those things.
A beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 2021. The universe is now ruled by the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV. And oh yes, I forgot to tell you, we finally got to see Dune. Finally! The Denis Villeneuve adaptation that was delayed until 2021 has been released. We originally talked about all the Dune adaptations back in episode 25, so we needed to do our Dune diligence and bring back our friend Daniel Ross to discuss the latest version of this unfilmable novel. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster, and with me, as always, is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
Yeah, doing okay. I think this desert has trained another faithful. We've got quite a bit of Dune here, and we can't get enough of it on this show, apparently.
No, we need 2 shows for it.
Because we're back. We're back for an Adunedum. Dune 2021.
Just like Denis Villeneuve needs 2 movies to tell this story, we need 3 podcasts to also talk about it.
Exactly.
We have a very special guest with us returning to discuss more Dune. Jeremy, would you mind doing the intro?
Yeah. Well, we had this guest on to do Dune previously, so we needed to bring him back so we could do our Adunedum properly. Everybody, welcome back, Daniel Ross.
Thank you. Good to be here. We get to do this podcast as many times as they get to try to make this movie. So,
The unfilmable movie, yet they've filmed it 3 times already.
yeah, we have we're in good shape.
Yes, they're going to keep trying.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the brand new Denis Villeneuve 2021 Dune. Just our thoughts and everything, because that was going to be part of our triple feature, discussing Lynch's 84 version, John Harrison's miniseries that came out in 2000, and then now, obviously, the 2021 version, which is only half the book, or just about half the book for this film. But I definitely am interested to hear your guys' thoughts on it, because I have my own, of course.
Well, so we had, I think, just to get the ball rolling, we had the focus of our conversation, I think, last time ended up being kind of about the adaptation of this unadaptable book. Mm-hmm. And, the different ways in which that happened or didn't happen with Jodorowsky's Dune, David Lynch's Dune, and John Harrison's Dune series. So I guess maybe it'd be interesting to hear you guys' thoughts about how you felt that this one was successful or not successful in that respect.
Dan?
Sure. It's interesting because I think Denis Villeneuve, it seemed like his principal goal with this film was to kind of prove that cliche wrong. I don't know if that, can you prove a cliche wrong?
Yeah.
But like
The unfilmable film?
Yeah, to sort of say like, no, I can do it, and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to prove it to you that this can be done. And I think the film, like, he certainly succeeds where others have failed in putting together something that sustained a certain like consistency of vision and production value that one would kind of like hope to see out of a major motion picture adaptation of this IP. But I have some thoughts on the sort of the success of it, as a work. But I think, like you can say like you can give him in a pass fail grade like pass marks on something that fulfills the like ambition to create a story that doesn't get derailed and kind of fizzle out into goofiness the way that the Lynch version ended up doing in the second half when it got taken away from him. And then of course like avoiding the pitfalls of the made-for-TV miniseries, although big asterisk there because I have thoughts on that piece of it too. And then, it didn't bite off anywhere near what Jodorowsky intended.
Right.
To bite off his adaptation. But I think, like the sort of like sum of that is like, all right, like, yes, Denny, you can make an adaptation of Dune, like good for you. You hit most of the marks, and it didn't like, get all janky.
Because they say the story or the novel's unfilmable because it's so complicated, but really the main plot points of the story are not that complicated when you think about it. Yeah. And I think even Lynch hit those points in the 1984 film. And I thought that I was watching a remake of that film at the beginning of this film in many ways. Just a modern take on it with new visuals and new sound, etc. But overall, I thought he did do a good job. I think there are some things that were omitted that I don't understand why for a 2.5 hour half of a book. I think that or half of a movie of supposedly, I think 2 more or maybe just 1 more. But with the time that they had in this movie to spend on big sweeping shots of watching, ornithopters fly over the sand, etc. Like maybe we could have got to that banquet, that big dinner scene that's like a very important character development scene that has been taken out of every one of these. Well, I think it was in the miniseries, but that wasn't that well achieved.
Oh, you're talking about where they like you just spill water on the ground and stuff like that, and
which they just learn. Kind of they breezed past that, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Giving up the water of the body. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they did touch on that in the scene where Javier Bardem was spitting on the ground, and it. I think that was played well for people who haven't read the book and aren't familiar with how all the rules work, because you get to experience the culture shock of like, whoa, that's insulting to have somebody spit on your feet, but actually in their culture it's just the opposite. That's the sign of the greatest respect, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was a very efficient way to approach that. I mean, yeah, perhaps that banquet scene there could have been something that they enhanced out of that. It
was
possible.
Shot. It was shot. Like there's a lot of stuff I've read that was shot. There are pictures of Lady Jessica in her formal attire for that event. So it just didn't make this cut. I'm sure it'll make the next cut, or I don't know how they can retroactively fit that in. But at the same time, I think that for as long as this movie was, we could have had some more of those scenes in there.
I have to say, so I wonder if, so Dune 2021 is part 1.
Yeah.
And, Dune 2024 or whatever is going to be part 2.
Part Dune.
Yeah, part Dune. And combined, those will probably be about the same minute count as John Harrison's Sci-Fi Channel version, right?
So 5 hours.
Yeah, it'll probably be in that neighborhood, because this one was, 2.5? And but you just see, I mean, and obviously I think what we talked about a lot with the John Harrison thing is that there were all these budget limitations, and it's hard, not to talk about those things. But even so, you could see how well in this one they were able to at least orient the audience as to what the hell's happening. There is a lot of world building. There is a lot of things that are important and not important, that you need to kind of push and pull your way into the story, and like kind of pick and choose your moments. And in that sense, I feel like they did a really good job of building a lot of that stuff and condensing things. Like, for instance, I think the biggest one for me, because I felt overall, I felt like the half of the story or whatever of the first book was pretty faithful in this as far as adaptations go. But one thing that kind of stood out that I thought was a great way to adapt it that they did in this one that they haven't done in the previous two was to sort of either just get rid of altogether or combine the Fade and Raban characters, the Fade Rautha and Beast Raban, both sort of, nephews of the Baron Harkonnen. It's like they play a very similar role. We'll just combine it, and you can have whatever villainy that the Beast gets up to. You can just have everything that Fade was going to do, have the Beast do it potentially. I don't know. Maybe in the next one they are going to have both characters, but in this one, it seems like they're going to just have that character be combined. And Daniel, when we were talking about it last year, when we were talking about all the previous adaptations, I think you brought that up about how on sort of the other side of things, they had a similar, they had two characters when they could have used one with the sort of man of action, the Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck characters being split apart. And this is in the book, and this is in all the movies, and even in this movie. But it just seems, when you're making that sort of adaptation from something super dense and complicated like a book into something, a little more quickly digestible like a movie, that sort of character combination thing, would be a benefit. And I think in this one they did it well.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the reasoning there, but I think you lose something, especially with Beast, Raban, and Fade, because I would say what this movie didn't do well. I didn't like their portrayal of the Harkonnen because it lost the decadent, ephemophilic or even pedophilic sclerosity that the book and even the Lynch adaptation captures so well. And I think
this was gone completely. In this
totally
one.
gone. Yeah, and I think the beautiful boy Fade Routha character that Sting played so memorably, it does.
He was made to play Fade. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting foil there also for Paul, and
right.
I think it creates a richer sense of aristocratic decrepitude and villainy and decadence to have that element, and he represented that, I think, a lot, in addition to the Baron, who also lost his sort of vices beyond gluttony. There wasn't any of those scenes where it was bring me a boy, and
Right.
No, it was just him floating around in oil and balsamic vinegar for most of the time.
Yeah, I wanted to dip my baguette in it.
I got a lot of Brando Apocalypse Now out of this Baron.
Oh, you caught that? Yeah.
When he came out of that black pool when he was healing from the poison or whatever, I was like, okay, there it is.
Or the very first time you saw him, like you were just miming there, Daniel, with wiping the sweaty head like Apocalypse Now.
It was a very one perfect shot. Call out right there.
It's yep, I've seen this movie. Here we go. That's an interesting point, and I guess I hadn't really thought about that in a certain sense, because they spent a lot of time developing the Atreides world and sort of none at all with the Harkonnen. And I think if you had to choose between the two, I think that's the way to go. I mean, essentially, there is in the book and in the previous adaptations, there's a lot of emphasis on the Harkonnen and their decadence and their greed and all these other things. However, in the book and the previous adaptations, the Harkonnen are also pretty one note in the sense that, well, they're just pure evil and there's nothing redeeming about them. And okay, so pure evil, what do you need? Just a dark castle and a gluttonous fat guy who saying and doing evil things. Got it. It's not as if we're trying to, peel back the onion on the Harkonnen. You know what I mean? There's not much there.
Sure, yeah. I think it's what flavor evil do you prefer? And I guess the more disgusting, the better for me.
Yeah.
Black licorice.
Yeah. Liquid black licorice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For me, the most difficult part was the ending, and a lot of that has to do with that is basically where I thought it was going to end, which is Paul getting
right accepted and
started on his journey through the sort of desert and learning to be a Fremen or whatever
into the Siege.
But I was really hoping they would find a way to make it feel like an ending versus this where it's
to be continued.
Yeah, let me get to this commercial break and we'll be back in 2 years,
Yeah.
You weren't satisfied with one line from Zendaya? This is just the beginning. Shit, I was here for 2.5 hours.
That is on par with the narration from the Lynch version. That's like, oh, I forgot to tell you.
Exactly. It's such the clunky intro.
Yeah.
Here, stand in front of this blue screen. We're going to put stars behind you and talk.
Yeah. Well, that I mean, to me, like, not to like we can finish the episode now because I'll give my verdict on the entire thing. But I think we've kind of mentioned this a couple of times, which to me, the first time I saw it was in Dolby Cinema, and my chair was like literally rattling with the sound, and I was overpowered by really the sound design.
Yes.
And the score.
Are you talking about the voice?
Yeah. the right frequency on me. But I had this like sneaking or this gnawing sense in my head, and I had some questions. So then I watched it again on HBO Max, and it kind of confirmed it. And I was like, yep, this feels like a prestige TV pilot. That's what this is. It's not a movie. It's the first episode
1
of a high production value HBO Max series.
Which would totally get picked up, production wise alone. They'd be like, sure, this looks great, show it, but show us 10 more episodes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the way that it ends like a pilot that wants to hook you and get you binging the next, several episodes. Because it does have that effect where you're like, ugh, like, give me more. It doesn't feel like a resolution note. It's a cliffhanger.
Perhaps a cliffhanger would have worked, though, with the battle, the holy battle there to allow Paul to enter, the fight to the death. Maybe end before that or right before that or something to kind of leave that on that cliffhanger. Or is Paul mortally wounded during that, and then that we kind of end there, something like that. But the way that it ended was kind of
like have the next scene where it's like, okay, so in the next scene in the book is he gets in and they have a little funeral for Janus or whatever his name is, the guy that he kills reluctantly in that battle to the death at the end there.
Not so reluctantly in this one.
It was still, he was like, do you yield? He tried to. He
pulled a really badass move, though, on him in the end to take him out, though.
It's a spin move.
Yeah, with a flourish, you just killed that guy, yeah.
Yeah, well, after 3 do you yields, he had to take him out with some style.
I asked you nicely 3 times, guy.
Yeah.
No,
I'm tired of asking. Yeah, exactly.
It's more than you get from, certain other figures of authority in this world. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing is that if they had taken it to that next scene, perhaps that would have felt more like an ending where it's like, you have the funeral for Janus or Genus or whatever, and then, you have his reaction to it and everyone getting, being in awe of his display of tears or whatever. And then maybe it's something about, his mother tries to implore him again to try and leave and get off planet or whatever. And like, we need to go back home. And he's like, no, I am home or something like that. Right. It's like,
there you go.
You'd have a way to feel like, okay, this piece of the story is over.
Now it's the desert, Paul. Now it's...
And then, right where we pick up, it's whatever, 3 or 4 years later. And we see a changed Paul or, a new name for Paul at that point.
Oh, yeah, spoilers, yeah. No one knows that.
Yeah, I think also just in terms of focus, this one had a little more focus, again, by not, doing much with the Emperor and,
not even
having...
in it.
Yeah, exactly. Like
no space guild, really. Well, the guild showed up, but not the fish people or the.
Well, they were. I think they were there in the scene where the emissary from the Emperor comes with his scroll. We see them with their like gold gas. Suits.
Full of spice gas, right?
Right. Yeah, full of spice gas. Yeah, but I think this is sort of like going back to the earlier point about like. Villeneuve's goal of sort of making like the competent adaptation of like somebody's finally going to do a competent version of this. Like I think it's at the expense of atmosphere and I don't know, vibes. Like for me, like the most indelible scene in the Lynch version is the Emperor Spacing Guild scene. Like Lynch's vision of what a Spacing Guild navigator looks like, and having the translator with the like scrambled speech, which
and it turns into English. Yeah,
that they copied in this on the Seleucus Secundus planet.
Yeah, exactly.
That stuff was so much more just rich and interesting than this version, which just again felt like very like hitting the marks.
Right,
like okay,
right.
like it's a competent thing. Like we don't have to worry about it, but it doesn't have that imagination to it that Lynch brought, and it's certainly not going to stick with me, that scene. But the scrotum guy coming out in that weird sort of steampunk tank, like that is
giant fish tank.
So
I
cool.
love it.
But and also I think the Lynch aesthetic nailed the Bene Gesserit look a lot better too, where it felt very otherworldly. It when you're describing them as witches, it's not just someone in mourning, which is kind of what we saw in Villeneuve.
Right.
But they're just these other people, and they do the monk thing where they shave their heads, and it's like they have the long flowing black and gold, whatever, and it's like they're very distinct looking.
That headpiece that they would wear that just kind of covered the bottom. Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed even the Gom Jabbar more, seeing it more in Lynch's. It had more of a grittiness to it, or a grounded feel to it. Denny left this all to your imagination, and while I'm fine with that, I like that Lynch just poured on the burning hand and every pain that Paul felt.
Yeah, he did the Superman vision through the box or whatever.
Body horror.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
well, you did get the body horror in the sense that, we're kind of seeing his imagination now. I feel like it gets a little lost because we're seeing so much of Dune in the desert and whatever, but that charred hand is supposed to be what he's dealing with. It would have been, it seems like if they had focused the amount of mind's eye flash cuts we saw to be more about the pain in his hand, we would have gotten that effect without having the ooh, is it too cringy to have the Superman vision on the box? Yeah. But other than that, I feel like that scene in particular, it wasn't overplayed, and you do get the point of what was going on. He's disoriented. The audience, in theory, is going to be disoriented a little bit. But by the end of it, you know that where everything stands, and that like the Lady Jessica, how she was feeling, because we got to see her outside, and how we had a scene I think before this where she was upset about something, was kind of crying in the hallway, and then had to gather herself real quick and then go inside and present herself. And we got to see that sort of in reverse, where she was gathered delivering Paul to this, and then had to step outside to be able to express herself. And I feel like in that sense that they did a lot of those things really well. Whereas with the John Harrison thing, the sci-fi thing, it was unintelligible for those first 2 episodes. In the David Lynch, they solved that adaptation device by having voiceover from a hard to understand because they're whispering, but then also hard to pick out who is doing the whispering, because it's like every whisper almost sounds the same,
Yeah, and while that's happening, are they just sitting in the room just waiting for the voiceover to end? How awkward is that for everyone else?
Yeah. It's
you're thinking, and
it's the Italian spaghetti western style of directing, where it's start counting to 6 or whatever. Uno, due.
Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying. I do think, though, that they, in their quest to kind of be understated in a certain way, I think they took it too far. So, Charlotte Rampling was underused, I thought, and the costume,
that's for sure,
obscured her face and didn't let her really be the character. And the audience, there was just this distance that, you could understand, okay, well, we're kind of seeing it from Paul's perspective, and he's sort of mystified by this stuff. But I think just as as an aesthetic, it was limiting.
Well, she does have a very powerful voice, even when she's not using, quote, the voice.
It's true, yeah.
But I do agree, like, she also has extremely piercing eyes, which would have, I think, helped that moment.
Right. And I think, like, another thing that this film kind of suffers from is the sort of, like, Dark Knightification of all movies. Like, after the Dark Knight, like, everything had to be so serious. Like, everything is so
Actually, I traced that back
serious.
to the Bourne Identity movies, but you're right. It's the Dark Knight took it to the next level, and everything's copying the Dark Knight now.
Yeah, but at least the Dark Knight had, like, a really memorable performance, which I would say this...
And it wasn't of the title character.
Exactly, yeah. And I think this movie doesn't have that. There's nobody that sort of, like, steals the show.
No.
At
Yeah,
all.
I agree.
I was dying for somebody to, like, step forward and be the star, and nobody took it on. And I think that's a lot of the fault is the script, really. Like, nobody had the platform to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the areas I wouldn't have, like, necessarily, I didn't want this to be him, and I wouldn't have expected it, but, like, the writing for Gurney was just so earnest and straightforward.
They're
sort of
brutal!
That line sucked. That line was so bad.
Yeah.
And he was kind of like a little bit of a silly goose in the book, and and he had this lightness to him. He had his
Come here, you
ballad.
young pup. My young pup. We didn't get that. Atomics. That's right. I love that one. I didn't feel any of that from Brolin's version.
No, he just seemed like an MMA fighter or something, more so than Jason Momoa,
Yeah.
Although I did like Duncan much more in this version than I liked him in previous one. He didn't do anything in Lynch's version. I mean, there were a few, and in the miniseries, he went out in the worst way. It was just like missiles got shot into something, and he just like flew out of there. It was really shitty.
Yeah.
But at least this one, he got what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to take out Sardaukar. He took out a whole, group of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and they gave his death, more meaning than you were saying in some of the other adaptations. And I think Gurney as a character becomes more of a character in sort of the second half of the first book. And so perhaps, that's part of it. When you're trying to get the audience to care about somebody, well, you care about the one who's going to die in this one, right? And like, we all know who Josh Brolin's character is in this one, so we'll get a little more meat on the bone next time, perhaps. The Oscar Isaac character, when he's out among the like sort of Stonehenge, tombs out there in the field, at least we got a little scene there where they have some sort of relationship. I think in all the other versions, even the sci-fi version where, what's his name?
William Hurt?
William Hurt was playing the Duke. Like, we didn't really get much of an attachment, so that when the Duke dies, you don't care, right? In this one, at least, potentially you give a shit when he dies.
But on the other side of that, I don't think they gave enough weight to Piter, the Mentat, because the Mentat, he's like running the show, and he's a very much more influential character with the Baron. He's got the Baron's ear and all that.
Yeah.
And in this one, they didn't really give him much. Again, the look was awesome. Like, don't get me wrong, I really liked how David Dastmalchian, how he was put together and everything, and I like his performance. But he could have done so much more. And then when he did die with the tooth. When the tooth got him, like he just kind of faded out in the clouds of poison smoke, and that was it.
Yeah.
And then it was like I didn't really care that he died. Like, that should have been a much more impactful kill, for the good guys. Good win for the good guys there, but it didn't really have that kind of weight.
Yeah, but the tragedy is all on the Duke Leto. I like this Duke.
Right.
That's the audience's internal narration.
Damn the spice!
They put a white hat on him in the Thopter.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about the Mentats, because I think overall that was the weakest piece of this entire production. But
I thought it was going to be great. They set up Thufir so great in that first scene when you first get introduced to him, and as he's doing the calculations in his head, his eyes turn white, and you know, like he really like nailed something. And I was like, is he going to be doing this? Like I could watch this for a whole movie, but it doesn't happen.
He just doesn't have much to do at all, and he just seems like an incompetent fool.
Yeah, which is totally not Thufir.
Right. And then even worse, actually. Sorry, not the Mentat wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was Dr. Yue.
Yeah.
I think, like, for somebody who doesn't know the story, I honestly don't think, like, does it even register the sort of betrayal that is happening? I think, like, the story completely decides this is not important.
You didn't set him up enough as a good guy.
Yeah.
and he, you know, he's also got he's very chummy with Paul, and I think they did that in the Lynch movie. I thought was it Harry Dean? No,
Dean Stockwell
from Quantum Leap.
Yeah.
So anyway, he seemed a little bit more, you know, involved in Paul's life. You know, they would talk, and he would teach him a little bit about Arrakis and the Harkonnen and all that. And then this one, Yue was kind of a side character that was just there to like help.
Yeah.
He was almost the help, like.
And he had the conditioning which imbues him with an inherent trust, which is something that the Atreides didn't even have to worry about.
Right.
Him as that was the most important thing about his character, is that he can't be the traitor because he has this sort of baked in programming that means he's not the traitor. And absent that fact in this story, it loses registers of narrative resonance. It's just like, oh well, yeah, okay, I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess
and that could have been solved with a one line.
No, you're right. It could have been solved. You're right, and it could have been solved in that scene after the little needle thing comes into his room.
The hunter killer.
Killer, and it's like, you know, someone suspects Yue or something, and they're like, no, can't be. I mean, I think that's even how they do it in the book.
Right.
But I think. Again, a lot of that stuff is like stuff that you can do in the book that, you need to simplify a little bit. But, you know, I know what you're saying. Like, maybe not that, I don't know what, he's programmed through MK Ultra to be loyal. Maybe we don't have to have those details, but like just, okay, he's just a loyal, he's always been a part of the family for generations or whatever. He helped my father or whatever. And, you know, you just kind of, you know, have that throwaway line to, you know, explain why everyone trusts him so thoroughly, and then, oh no, he also has this this idiotic plan. In this one, his plan was idiotic because he thought he was going to get his wife back or something, whereas in the book he knew he was not going to get that, but he wanted to try and kill the Baron.
No, it was virtually the same idea. The problem was,
maybe I missed that detail
in the book, and then in the Lynch version, like there's more. They establish the scheme in greater detail, so the conspiracy is like more fleshed out, and you understand Yue's motivations in real time. It isn't like backfilled as a sort of like, let me explain, Mr. Bond, how you're going to die sort of thing. You know, like, so you're sort of with it, and there's irony baked in. And there are scenes where he's interacting with the Baron, and the Baron has him strung along thinking that his wife is captive. And so the sort of like, you know, wordplay that the Baron is doing is, you know, I told you I would return or free her or be with her, and kills. Yeah. So we the audience can see that coming, but it needed more time to interact between the characters.
But that's what I'm saying. Like I feel like he knew that in the book, the Yue character knew that his wife was dead, despite whatever the Baron was saying. And his whole plan was just to kill the Baron, and vengeance. Like, sorry, Duke, I had to use you to get to him or something like that. But I mean, perhaps I'm forgetting that detail.
I might be too.
Yeah.
This is a rigorous podcast. Right?
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think regardless, I mean, like we got enough of that to understand what's going on, you know, where we don't need to go too much further for how brief this character's there. I know what you're saying though. Like, you do get a lot more out of it when you understand that, I don't know, these advisors or whatever are there. And, there's this almost genetic programming.
They can't be corrupted or
doesn't allow them to lie and to the people they serve. And you also then further get this idea of how, rigid and, how much of a caste system this world is in. But I don't know. I kept trying to think about it after the movie. I was like, I wonder how much of this, if you were just to watch it knowing nothing about the Duneverse, like, would you know this stuff and be able to get the world building? I feel like they got the crucial stuff. I wonder if some of the, richer stuff was missing, and that's what kind of some of the stuff you're responding to.
Well, I think on that point, I would totally say that this version was missing the pervasive aesthetic of Dune. I did not feel watching this the way I felt reading the book or even watching the Lynch version. I don't think it captured the and I think this is what people mean by the unfilmable, is that it really didn't capture the sort of uncanniness of the universe that Herbert created. And I think that was because it was so focused on the mechanics of the world building stuff and depicting it almost in documentary detail. It didn't have that mystery or mystique, I should say.
I wonder if part of what you're responding to there is the fact that we saw all of these extremely complicated mechanical devices that, part of the whole thing is that the world is not supposed to have computers, and it was supposed to be something that disappeared eons ago.
but are still on Nyx.
Many machines on X. New machines.
But instead they have this this form of magic which they've discovered out in the desert, right? And then it's kind of a metaphor for the combustion engine or whatever, right? And okay, but I think if they had somehow captured the magical aspects of the way that they do interstellar travel or whatever, and the way that they still rely on swords and stuff for a lot of their combat, right? It's there'd be a lot of that uncanniness like you're talking about, and perhaps that's some of the stuff we were all responding to when looking into the mind's eye of Jodorowsky and seeing what he had planned for it. Was some of this stuff where it's you'd have an ornithopter, which, okay, maybe it's not as helicopter-like as it is in this thing. I mean, I think they did a good job realizing those wings and then creating sort of dangerous scene where the one wing wasn't working and the other wing snapped off, and I think they did a good job with all that stuff. But it's there was too much left to your imagination that this is just space travel, and the way that people get around in the space travel is through computers and rockets and all this kind of stuff, whereas in the world of Dune that's supposed to be kind of in this realm of more magic and stuff. Same with the Mentats and the what are they called, the Bene Gesserit and all that kind of stuff, where it's and then so therefore everything else in the world feels just off kilter,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe that's actually a really great way to distill it. I think in reading the book, trying to envision an ornithopter was always a bit challenging for me, and it seemed like a goofy contraption.
Yeah.
Right. Operates like an animal or like a bug or
Yeah, but I think that in the Villeneuve version, they did do such a good job of making it seem legit that it demystified it in a way that was, on the one hand, I was I didn't expect them to make an ornithopter look like kind of cool and functional.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, they kind of stripped it of its magic for me. It's like almost too like it makes too much sense. It seems like
right.
too much of a real thing. Like, oh yeah, that does seem like something that the military would make.
I think the mystique really maintained though with Harkonnen and how Baron Harkonnen would move himself around. He was such a fat rhinoceros that he couldn't get up off his ass and actually walk. So he'd be, I don't know, covered in that anti-grav or whatever that was on his back. It would just light up.
The suspensors. Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. That was good, and I think a little bit better than the Lynch version where he was, it was almost like he was flying around on a rope or a jetpack.
He would like blow it up like it was helium or something, like it was a big balloon. Yeah,
exactly.
Like the blueberry in Willy Wonka.
The Duke will die before these eyes, and he'll know that it is I, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who encompasses his doom.
What did you guys think of production quality, Denis Villeneuve's visual? I think he's a master of the visuals, to be honest, in my opinion. But what did you guys think of it overall? I mean, you said that some of the costuming you didn't agree with. But.
Well, mostly just in sort of contrast to the Lynch stuff. I mean, I think that's where a lot of that was coming from. I mean, especially since, okay, well, you have the template to work off of, and you can kind of. But I think a lot of that is sort of to your complaint, Daniel, about like, the way things look are too recognizable. We all know what space suits and, future fantasy costumes look like, and this looked like a lot of that stuff. Okay, so he nailed the still suits, and it wasn't just the Ghostbusters zip up thing that was in the Sci-Fi Channel, but it was closer to what you imagine these things to be, with the nose thing and the mask and the like little tubes and pockets, and it looks complicated as hell. And so obviously it makes sense when they are surprised that he knows how to put it on, right?
Desert fashion.
Yeah, right. With the way he crosses his boots or whatever.
Yeah. What is that? Does he just French cuff him at the bottom? Is that like the cool thing that they used to do in the 80s?
Yeah, he's pegged his pants.
You know how to roll your desert smokes up in your sleeve.
I've seen MTV a few times.
Yeah.
You've worn a still suit before.
I think the other thing was, and I think this is in the book, they talk about the vid books or something like that, and they do some of that in this, and it's like, if you'd removed that detail, or like, change some of the costuming on what's their planet? What's the ocean planet? Caladan.
Caladan, yeah.
You would maybe start to get some of that off kilter feel, and this is something we haven't experienced before, and it's not quite as safe. And I think that a lot of those things are the things you guys are responding to a little bit, which is like, even though it's all very competent here, it's also all very safe, and okay, so it's a $400 million movie or whatever it costs, and the safety button is secured and fastened and double, triple locked, and we're not going to be able to move too far out of that. But it's interesting, like his, just in terms of your question about, the Villeneuve aesthetic, right? It's like, that's part of the thing that like I was kind of thinking about the other day after watching it, and it's like, even through whether it's Prisoners or Enemy or Arrival or Sicario or one of these things, it's like, in all those movies, okay, there's something grounded there, so you're kind of, the way you're seeing it is sort of supposed to relate to the way the world looks, but then he often does these things where it's otherworldly, and I think Enemy is a perfect example of that, with the sort of wide shots of the city, and there's this lingering smog over everything, and then just the quality of light and everything like that. And in that movie, he's able to make Toronto, or wherever it was taking place, look like a different world. And in this one, okay, the architecture and the sort of medieval power structures or whatever are otherworldly. And it's all very sort of, beautiful and competent and everything else, but it didn't have that, again, that off-kilter thing that we've been talking about, where it's like, and that's something he's totally capable of doing, again, cite Enemy as an example, right?
I'll give him credit. Like, some of the aesthetics that I did like, he got the most important thing right, in my opinion, about sci-fi that's set in space, which is slow ships. They have to be slow,
yeah,
and massive and sublime. That's so important to just like linger on those shots where you see this, behemoth entering the frame, and you can't really suss out its propulsion source,
right.
That I think he did really well.
Or it's like hard to compare its scale, and then all of a sudden you see the planet, you're like, oh my god,
yeah. So those things were good. And I think some of the production design was fun. Like, some of the interior stuff was good. I like the little details, like the suspensor lamps. I thought that stuff was nice. I thought, for as long as this movie was, and I know I appreciate the sort of desire to tighten it up, but I thought the movie was like at its best when it had these kind of like lyrical moments. The two that come to mind for me was when Paul is going in to do the Gom Jabbar test. They're kind of about to go in, and there's a cutaway to a bunch of the Bene Gesserit sisters kind of like conferring in the shadows, and they sort of like slip away into a dark sort of stage right or whatever, stage left. And those touches, like I feel like there could have been more of those kinds of touches that inject more of that mystery into the world and the sort of unknown. Like, you can't quite perceive all of the machinations going on.
Well, I one, or actually two things like that. One was in the scene with the hunter gatherer. What was that thing called?
Hunter Seeker.
Hunter Seeker. Right before it gets to him, he's walking through some sort of, projected image, and the look on his face, and all the little sources of light, running down all over. I think that was great, aesthetically speaking, and it felt strange and a little uncanny, and I feel like it would have been nice to have a little more of that. And the other one was, you were talking about some of these nice moments with, where we're taking our time. And I felt like, there were little spots, sort of throughout the movie where they made sure to take a second to, focus on that, 3D Picasso, sculpture of the bullfighting, the mounted head of the bull with the very strange horns. And, kind of having that be part of this running theme throughout it. And I feel like they did a really good job, both sort of aesthetically and thematically, weaving that into the, such an epic and long and complicated story.
My favorite moment like that, it was kind of I'm ambivalent about it, because I think narratively it was really good, and almost it kind of reminded me of something Spielberg might do, which was the Muad'Dib moments, the little mouse.
Yeah, the close-ups of the mouse.
I thought that was a really great touch. Now, I hated the mouse, this like CGI. It was like so just like, it just screamed like CGI.
Cartoon.
I wish
right?
it was just like a real animal or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The close-up of the ear got to me.
Yeah, but I thought the like moment letting it breathe, wondering, like, what is this mouse doing on these dunes, surviving out here in the desert?
Right.
Now, of course, we know, being familiar with the story, sort of what that's foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was like a really good touch that will pay off later for everybody, whether you know the story or not. You know, it has that nice.
No, you're right. That was something, and perhaps technologically, it was out of the reach in 1984. But they, I feel like they didn't even have that show up at all in the Lynch Dune.
They just talked about the spot on the moon. In the shape of the desert mouse. Yeah.
And so it was nice to have him actually take the time to do that.
They took a little too much time in the miniseries with the horrible effects they had there.
The sock puppet that they...
Yeah, exactly. You wanted a cutaway to a screen that says, mouse here or whatever instead. But that reminds me. So that scene right before we get some of the moments with the desert mouse, the ornithopter had just crashed, and they were hiding out or whatever, and they're in that little tent, and they did something that I think perhaps feels more obvious, and oh no, this is a little too movie of them to do, but I felt was effective, which was to have Paul not be the totally closed off, emotionless, and stoic Jedi Master, which in the book, the moment all the betrayals start happening, he just boom, light switch turns off, and he's now this totally internal being and exterior. He doesn't cry, he doesn't express himself, he doesn't talk about things other than sort of these sage ways of talking. And what was interesting and what I felt they did a good job of in this one was to have him have an emotional reaction to his dad dying and all these things. And again, like the other two adaptations that were realized went closer to what the book portrays. But the problem is that, we don't get the contradictory internal monologue, which the book also portrays. So, the external facade is, this very stony faced, nothing can touch me. And then on the inside, he's in turmoil. And okay, so the way that we experience movies, it's through, the actor and being able to understand what's going on internally, being expressed like a human. And he does that. And, we just, got rid of that piece of the book, which, again, I think just in terms of adapting it to screen is something you needed to do, and you needed to find another way to make the Lady Jessica, worry about Paul because he's so strange or whatever now.
I thought they could have done it in subtitles. They used a lot of subtitles in the movie. That opening, I think it's one of either the Sardaukar or the Navigators. It's one of the languages that's in the movie. And there's a subtitle on there that kind of gives the opening of the film.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost as if you, in the middle of conversations, it might have been a really interesting move to just put up what the person was thinking underneath, in a subtitle, or text on screen. It might have been an interesting way to portray that.
Now you're thinking like somebody who can take on an adaptation of Dune.
Yeah,
it's you can't adapt that. It's unfilmable, Dan. Let's be honest here.
No, but I mean, they did do a really good. This is another thing, real quick. They did do a really good job of the little hand symbols and stuff that they were doing, that little sign language and some of the other languages and things they were doing. Yeah,
that was good.
Yeah.
And how were they able to outsmart these guys on the ornithopter? Well, we
Even
understood what was going on exactly, and that they had this sort of secret way of communicating with one another. The audience was clued into all that, even if perhaps they didn't know all the sort of details that the book gets into. They gave you enough of it to, be able to experience the story.
To your point, Jeremy, I think one thing that will be interesting to see play out in part 2 is the themes that come through so clearly in the book, because the book almost literally just tells you that Beware of messiahs. Messiah bad. Messiah bad. Messiah bad. Everybody.
Yeah.
Messiah bad.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, it's a more naturalistic. He does have these visions, and he does kind of like babble a little bit about what he's worried about, but the volume on the idea of like, yes, you live in a fascistic aristocratic hell world, and also maybe a messiah that isn't the answer either. Like that. The book does a great job of that tension.
Of pushing both those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like what will be really boring will be if like in part 2 it's the sort of like Anakin Skywalker story of like, oh no, you used to be so noble and pure of heart and well intentioned, and now you're villainous and corrupted. Like, it's gonna have to hinge on the Fremen more and sort of how they respond to it, because I don't, I do think Timothy Chalamet is the best Paul.
I agree.
Hats off to him. I was a little bit skeptical, but he did a good job, I thought.
Yeah.
And but I don't think, like, I'm still not super interested in his arc in that sense of it. Like, I don't know. I think they need to play with the like contradictions of like what he is. He's a colonizer. He's a part of a fascist like state. He is a satanic kind of messiah that is gonna like burn the universe. Like, if it sort of stays close to Paul the individual and his personal arc, and do we care about him as a human being? Like, I think that's where the unfilmable stuff comes in, because it really does like move away from the the sort of like character driven concerns of like what we're accustomed to with this kind of story, and becomes more sort of thematically almost like essayistic.
Yeah.
Whatever
What if the
that
rug
means.
is completely pulled out under all of us on part 2, and they film the end of Jodorowsky's Dune and have Dune fly off into the universe somewhere?
Oh yeah.
The Dune spore. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. When the Harkonnen had Dr. Yue's wife, they said that they were picking her apart, like pulling up, or they said that they would pull her apart, like pull her appendages apart. Like that was a line that they used. I wonder, was that in the book? Or was that an ode to Duke Leto's death of Jodorowsky's Dune? Maybe.
I don't remember how she was supposed to have died in the book. That's a good question. But yeah, I was definitely thinking of that too. I was like, oh, that seems like the death of Duke Leto in the Jodorowsky version. To this question of where's the Paul story going? Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. Unfortunately, start to have worries of like, oh, is this going to go in a Game of Thrones direction with this whole thing? And like, in the first book, which is the only one I've read, it's like, he keeps seeing these visions of the sort of jihad or crusade, as they say in this one, that he will inspire, and that he's trying to fight against a future that he keeps seeing in these visions, and trying to push on these things and all these things. In the book, anyway, that seems to be where that struggle is. Like, there's sort of the real world, Game of Thrones power struggle of Harkonnen and the Emperor and all this other, the Fremen and the Dune or Arrakis or whatever, and all of that. And then there's also the sort of internal, spiritual, should I even try to do this thing? What if by doing this I unleash something even worse? And I think to the Fremen, they probably can't imagine anything worse, but they and this seems like the way to go. But that is an interesting aspect of the book, and I think, again, when we're talking about the way that Jodorowsky's script was to end, was different than the book, but captures that spirit of like, that Paul was going to be this catalyst and this agent of change for this world or universe or whatever they're in at the moment. Like we'll change everything essentially. And the question is, I guess, it's like, will that struggle of should he do it, should he not do it? Is this going to create more harm than good? Like that kind of thing. All that's very interesting. It seems like they're hinting at it's going to be a part of it. And I really hope so. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. What did you guys think of the Fremen?
Yeah, I mean,
Didn't get a lot of them, right?
I was just about to, yeah, exactly. I was about to say, like, we didn't get a whole lot, and I'm wondering if you're unfamiliar with the text,
Right.
would you be able to get much out of the Fremen and the way that it was portrayed? Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that one. The way I felt about it was like, okay, well, it's pretty faithfully portrayed in certain ways, and we're still on the outside,
Right. That's
looking
what I was
in.
going to say. Yeah. We're not in the seats yet
Yeah.
as the audience. Yeah. Because the only thing that we get out of them is we meet Stilgar and a handful of them, and also Dr. Kynes. It's not Dr. Kynes, I think, right? Is it Dr. Kynes?
Yeah, it is.
And then we also see one of you were talking about the vid books, but I think in this one it's more like a projector, right? That he's got sitting on the ground
Yeah.
of the movement through the desert, so they don't get tracked by sandworms or Shai Halud. We got a little bit of that stuff, but I think that if there's more than one extra part coming, if it's 2 and 3, or if it's 2, I think that should be very Fremen focused, because it should be all about the desert and the desert power at this point, right? I mean, that's where at least they were leading to.
Yeah, that's true. I think it was a sort of faithful, like of all of the things, it was sort of the most faithfully done, I thought. And now that I think about it, I might revise what I said earlier about wanting somebody to step forward and steal the show. I won't say he steals the show, but Javier Bardem was probably my favorite actor.
But I didn't feel like we got enough of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I loved like every scene he was in. Like
Yeah.
I just, it's always a joy to watch him, and
Agreed, yeah.
he does a really good job. And like Timothée Chalamet, best Paul, he's definitely the best Stilgar, I think.
Yeah.
I just love that he comes in not going to take any shit from the new rulers of his planet. The new folks that are now
Yeah.
going to run the show. He's like, whatever. You're not going to be the first, or you're not the first. You're not going to be the last, right? There's going to be more of you after this. So
You're the new
whatever.
babysitter? Don't care. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think what I like about his performance, and he's such a good actor, and what he does so well is that, like, despite the Dark Knight or Bornification of this film, he has this like dead seriousness, but underneath it, a little bit of like comic relief in the contrast.
And you got that toward the end in some of that, the tension breaking moments there, when Paul and Jessica meet up with Stilgar and crew, and it's like he showed a little bit of that in the scene you're talking about, Brian, but like also I think and more of it anyway in the sort of later scenes that we saw him in.
Desert was ours long before you came.
It feels like we've got a lot to expect from the next one, which will be part 2 of book 1, but kind of like what we keep hinting at here, it feels like perhaps like the some other superhero cinematic universes and whatever else, and like you were talking about earlier, Daniel, like that this is the first step onto doing the entire Dune series, and I don't know. I mean, I have no idea what I haven't read anything about it or whatever, but it has that feeling where the end of part 2 will only be the end of book 1, and that while it feels like when you get to the end of book 1, a piece of the story's done, there's a lot more to go, and it feels like they're going to probably want to push that, especially since it seems like this movie's received well and successful and all that.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have their work cut out for them, and we have some weird movies in store if they decide if their path truly does lie in the desert.
Maybe in 5 years, when this next movie is completed and fully produced, then we'll have to meet up again for another podcast to talk about that one.
Totally. Yeah. 4 years from now or whatever.
Well, maybe by then all computers will be banished, and it'll be a different setup.
We won't be able to stream it. We will have to go to the theater.
Yeah, to podcast live. Yeah, exactly.
I've never met Harkonnens before. They're not human. They're brutal.
Well, I'm excited to hear that you saw it in the theater. At least I went and watched it at the IMAX over here. Mm-hmm. It was pretty insane. Yeah. They did shoot whatever it was, 60% of it, or all the set pieces anyway, in the Alexa digital version of the IMAX. It was, a large format digital thing. It was pretty insane seeing it blown up like that. But yeah, I imagine most people who have seen it have probably just saw it at home, right? I mean, I don't know. At home, the theater was packed when I was there, but which was weird because it was a noon screening on a Saturday or something.
I saw it. I did an 11:30 a.m. on a Sunday.
That's the time to go.
This is real adult hours here.
Yeah, that's the time to go. I love that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's true. The sound was crazy. It was just like I was the Maxell guy. Like,
yeah.
Holy shit.
Well, what was great was like feeling that the audience was getting either scared by or into seeing the danger of the sandworm or whatever, especially during the like scene where the harvester or whatever was getting sucked in. Seeing the like ripples of sand coming, you could hear the audience just that kind of thing. Despite the fact that the sound was blowing out your ventricles in your heart because the bass is so loud, you could still hear the audience gasp. It was incredible.
Yeah. Keep like sneezing blood by the end of the movie.
Am I supposed to be doing that? Yeah.
It was highly entertaining. I will give it that.
For sure.
Nailed that piece of it. So
for sure, and I think that also is part of the like, okay, you're playing it safe, but like. There has to be a piece that like lets the audience in. I don't know. I mean, in terms of adaptation, I felt like it was successful in that way. I think you're right, especially bringing up the most exciting thing about the entire world and world building of Dune is, that off-kilterness that really like, this doesn't seem like anything I've ever heard of or thought of before,
Whoa, sandworms. You hate them, right?
Well, thanks for joining us yet again. This was another good episode. Thanks so much for talking Dune with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms at the Grindhouse Institute. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next week.
Ciao.
I must admit, against all better judgment, I like this Duke.